Okay, good evening everybody. My name is Pete Kavangh. I'm the Regional Secretary of Unite the Union. Really proud and really honoured to be asked to chair this evening's proceedings. We've got a very interesting evening ahead of us, I hope. We've got an excellent panel. I'll do the intros first of all. On the far left, we have Bianca Todd, who's arranged this evening's event and will be speaking at the back end of the meeting. Next to Bianca, we've got John Hendy, QC, who I imagine might be venturing into the legal arena and talking about things like trade union freedom, I hope. Then we have Kate Hudson, who's the General Secretary of the CND. Very pleased to have Kate here. And next to me, sort of contrasting eras and ages a little bit, is Joe Holland, who's the youth representative of the Northampton Left Unity. And Joe will be bringing the speeches to a rousing finale before Bianca sums up. Just before we get going, I'm going to say a few things about Ron, of course, but before we get going, I just wanted to sort of give an example of how Ron Todd remains a force to be reckoned with in Unite the Union. Many of you may have heard or will know that Unite is about to move from its regional office in North London to a new headquarters down at the Angel. And of course, one of the things you have to do when you move union offices is you have to find a name for the building. The regional secretary, my good self, tried my level best to suggest that we should avoid historic figures and names, and gave all sorts of reasons for why we should do that. I'm quite proud to say that on occasions the regional committee listens to me. But on this occasion I was roundly trounced and defeated because the overwhelming majority of the regional committee had gotten their heads together, plotted and schemed and conspired as good delegates to committees do, and voted overwhelmingly for Ron Todd House for the new headquarters of the Unite Union. I think it's a real measure, isn't it? You know, 20 years after Ron's general secretaryship, that you know, lay members, young and old, decided that the fitting name for that building is Ron Todd House. I'm going to use a phrase that chairs often use, which is we're meeting tonight in interesting times. We had the Labour leader's speech a couple of days ago, which I think all of us welcome a lot of what was in it. He was talking about building 200,000 homes, he was talking about proper apprenticeships, he was talking about getting rid of the hated bedroom tax, putting some controls on the utilities companies, and a number of other things that we've all been waiting for, and you know, our movement has been crying out for. And I think the surprise to me is that in this most austere of times, with this most right wing of governments, we've had to wait so long for a Labour leader to actually start talking about the things that we want to be hearing about. A little short on detail, and of course far more to go. Very little, if anything, about trade union freedoms. Very little, if anything, about redistributive taxation, and a number of other things that we need to hear the Labour Party talking about if we're really going to get the working class supporting what should be their party again. But we're waiting to, you know, the times we're living in. I was at a public meeting last night in Walthamstow, organised by one of our branches. An excellent meeting, talking about fighting back in the public sector. Went for the obligatory drink afterwards, and the first thing that was said to me after they asked me to follow them around was they pointed out that this is where Ron Todd was born. I hadn't said a thing about the meeting I was doing tonight, but the meeting last night was about fighting back in the public sector. We've had some fight backs, haven't we, despite the doom and the gloom and the myths that this government puts around about there is no alternative, we have to pull in our belts, we've all been greedy and profligate. We've seen some fine examples, particularly in Unite the Union, of groups of workers fighting back, not just fighting back, but winning. We had the London bus workers right across London last year taking strike action and winning 100% in the dispute that they were involved in. We've had Tilbury Dockers a couple of years ago fighting back again, just after this government came to power. Their terms and conditions were being attacked. They took 4-day strike action, supported by solidarity action in countries as far afield as Scandinavia and Spain, and they won that dispute. We've had disputes where shop stewards have been sacked and supported by their members, and we've won those disputes as well. But this is a time where we need more than just individual disputes. We need to be bringing workers together, trade unions together, and the TUC, of course, before this last conference, talked about looking at the practicalities of organising a general strike, and it's perhaps not too surprising that 1 year later we haven't quite seen that yet. But I think there's a real appetite out there, not just for individual disputes, but actually, finding a way of bringing workers together in solidarity to demand a better world and more rights for us in our workplaces, and indeed for all the communities that we live in and represent.
Which have got the highest rates of collective bargaining coverage, because there are economic arguments in favour of collective bargaining. It's not just the self-interest of trade unionists. There are economic arguments where you've got collective bargaining, keeping up wages, you increase demand in the economy. Putting demand into the economy stimulates the economy, stimulates production, stimulates services, creates more jobs, puts more money into the exchequer, and so on. That's why collective bargaining, as we used to know it, those of us old enough to remember in the 1970s, joint industrial councils, wages councils, and all that machinery, didn't just come about in the 1970s. It was actually introduced by a committee called the Whitley Committee in 1918 at the end of the First World War as a means of reconstructing the economy after the ravages of the First World War. And it would blossomed again in the 1930s as a means of reconstructing the economy after the Great Depression of 1929. Employers themselves recognised that collective bargaining was a necessity to keep wages up and hence demand for their products in the economy. Now there are other reasons as well. We've had a legal argument in favour of collective bargaining, an economic argument in favour of collective bargaining, but of course there are other arguments that I don't need to develop in front of this audience. There's the argument in favour of democracy at the workplace. Without a union to represent workers, without collective bargaining at the workplace, workers have no say. There is no democracy at the workplace. And the workplace is a place where, I can't speak for the unemployed of course, but for working people, this is where they spend many, many hours, days, weeks, months, years of their lives, denied a voice over their working conditions, denied any chance to affect decisions such as the closure of factories or the reduction in production and so forth and so on. So for the reasons of democracy at work, collective bargaining is essentially. And there is also the argument about social justice at the workplace in order to combat the inequality of power that is inherent in the relationship between the individual worker and the employer. It is necessary for workers to combine in trade unions and for trade unions to collectively bargain on their behalf. Now, I think it's a tragedy that the Labour Party doesn't recognise that the restoration of collective bargaining as a matter of democracy, social justice, economics, and a matter of international law is not used as a weapon, a means, or promoted as a means for reconstruction to get out of the terrible financial crisis that this country, indeed most of the world, is now engulfed in. But quite the contrary. The government of this country, the governments that form the European Union, the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank, are trying to destroy collective bargaining throughout Europe. We have to fight against it. Ron Todd would have supported that struggle. and just as Unite is supporting it today. Thanks for listening.
John, I'm sure we'll have some contributions on your presentation there. We're next going to ask Kate to speak from the CND. I think it's interesting to have, you know, a span of views here, a span of issues and interests. And of course, again, as I mentioned in the introduction, Ron was a lifelong supporter of the CND and stood out and was outspoken when some of the rest of the movement sadly was moving away from that unilateral position. I was just thinking on the way over here, Kate, I was arrested 2 nights running myself when the cruise missiles first arrived here. I've never done anything like that before, but I didn't like the sound of it. And nobody told me that amongst that pacifist crowd that you're not supposed to fight back when the police put their hands on you. So I got rather badly treated that night compared to most of the pacifists. But, you know, I do remember that, and of course, you know, I was really proud, even then, that I knew the trade union movement with people like Ron were involved alongside CND. So over to you.
And I'd just like to start off by saying what an honour it is to be here to speak at this event. Ron Todd was one of CND's vice presidents in recognition of his absolutely outstanding and principled position for unilateral nuclear disarmament, which you've touched on already, Pete. But just in particular, the way in which Ron stood up to Neil Kinnock when Kinnock was trying to overturn the Labour Party's policy on unilateral nuclear disarmament. You know, he was a real fighter to try and defend that position. Sadly, at that time, it was lost. But I think at the moment we're in a better position to try and achieve Ron's goals with regard to nuclear disarmament, probably, than we ever have been. There's a real sea change taking place, which leads many of us that are active in the movement to believe that we may be in a position now to move forward on nuclear disarmament. The most recent development with that, of course, was 2 weeks ago at the TUC Congress, when Billy Hayes moved the composite resolution on economic policy, which included the commitment to scrap Trident. And of course, we were delighted that that composite was supported by Unite the Union. So a real strong position now coming out of the TUC. Of course, we're mindful of the jobs issue, which is of great concern, but in that resolution was also a commitment to ensure that a new government has industrial policy which will secure jobs that are moving from the manufacture of weapons of mass destruction to things that will actually be beneficial to our society. But it's not just with regard to the trade union movement where views are changing and there's a strengthening of the anti-nuclear position, because we might expect that to be the case given the shared values of peace and justice which the peace movement and the trade union movement have. It's also much wider in society that views are changing. And in fact, it's been the case that in opinion polls over the last several years, maybe since 2006 to 7, opinion polls have showed that the majority of the British population a majority of the British population would like to see Trident scrapped. And if you look at the breakdown of those opinion polls, it's all across society, across all social classes, across all age groups as well, and particularly strong, I should say, in the younger age groups. People see no reason for Britain to spend its resources on weapons of mass destruction. And of course, one of the ways in which people have come to an understanding of opposition to nuclear weapons is indeed because of the economic crisis which John has referred to. We know, for example, in 2016, Parliament is going to decide whether or not we should build a new nuclear weapons system, whether we should replace Trident. Conservative estimates of how much that would cost comes in at over 100 billion. That's just a conservative estimate of what we could spend on nuclear weapons. And not surprisingly, the majority of people, when they see hospitals closing, underfunded education, homes lost, jobs lost and so on, people would rather that that money was spent on something that was beneficial. Yeah, so more and more people are coming to say, we don't want our money spent on nuclear weapons. But it's also interesting to see that beyond ordinary, sensible, normal people, there are also other people we might not expect to support nuclear disarmament that are now coming around to that as well. For example, in the top levels of the military, there's been generals, field marshals, former chiefs of staff, all that sort of thing, who are now saying Trident is militarily useless. There's correspondence recently in the pages of the Times and the Telegraph, many, particularly retired senior military figures saying Trident is militarily useless, it should be scrapped. And from their point of view, if there's going to be money spent on military things, it should be spent on boots and equipment for the troops. So that's coming from a military perspective. But it's interesting, they see that nuclear weapons have no military value whatsoever. And in fact, that view is also interestingly discussed by Tony Blair in his autobiography, which was published just a few years ago. You may remember in 2007 he was very pro the first vote in Parliament in favour of replacing Trident. But in his autobiography he said, "Oh well, I looked at it from both points of view. I thought there was a good case for and there was a good case against. Obviously it was no use in countering the security challenges we face today, like terrorism and things like that." But he said, in the end, I decided I would support Trident replacement because of the status factor. So, £100 billion because, he thinks that will keep us at the top table of big status with nuclear weapons. Absolutely. There are many politicians as well who've changed their minds on this too. Michael Portillo, for example, you may remember, was the Tory Defence Secretary in the 1990s. He's now said it's completely past its sell-by date and it should be scrapped. Even Des Brown, who was the Labour Defence Secretary in 2007, who got it through Parliament for Tony Blair, he now thinks that a lot has changed since then, and we shouldn't go ahead with the kind of full replacement. We should downsize it and take it off permanent control. So all those attitudes are changing. What's not changing so much, unfortunately, is actually the attitudes in the leadership of the Labour Party. So it's like Tories seem to be changing, military people are changing, but unfortunately in the top of the Labour Party leadership, that change is not taking place to the same extent. In fact, sometimes people like Jim Murphy, the Shadow Defence Secretary, he is actually more gung-ho pro-Trident than many of the Tory leaders are themselves. This is a kind of a shocking situation that we have to force to change from the movement to bring the leadership of the Labour Party into line what the majority of the movement wants. Ed Miliband, when he was standing in the leadership elections 3 years ago, or two, whatever it was, he was, along with Diane Abbott, who was completely opposed to replacing Trident. He was actually different from the others in saying he thought Trident should be reviewed. It shouldn't automatically be replaced. There should be a full review of it, and we should decide whether or not we need a Cold War system to meet our security needs today. Unfortunately, that was very welcome, but unfortunately, he hasn't really lived up to that promise. Because although Trident has been discussed in the Labour Party's National Policy Forum, which is ongoing and leading up to Labour Party election policy for the 2015 election, there's been a lot of debate within the National Policy Forum, but the anti-nuclear nature of that debate hasn't been reflected in the reports, the official reports of the National Policy Forum. So it's as if what's been going on, the debate that's going on, is somewhat being suppressed. And when it came to the Labour Party conference, collective bargaining was not the only thing not on Ed Miliband's speech. Nuclear weapons weren't there either. We weren't surprised, but nevertheless, it's 2 years to the general election. It's 3 years until the discussion and the vote in Parliament on whether we replace it. Labour Party conference should be having that debate. That should be there. And there was many CLPs, constituency Labour parties, that put in resolutions calling for there to be a debate about Trident on the floor of the conference, and they were all ruled out of order. You know, so there was no debate. Well, it was a CND fringe meeting, but there was no proper debate on the floor of the conference. And we believe very strongly that has to be allowed to happen, because it's not just CND that thinks things have changed. You know, that many people think that. And in fact, the government, this current government, after it came into power in the autumn of 2010, it actually produced a new national security strategy, you know, to look at the threats facing Britain and to rank them and consider what Britain needed to do. That national security strategy downgraded state-on-state nuclear threats to a level 2 threat, and all the tier 1 level 1 threats were things like terrorism, cyber warfare, pandemics, organised crime, climate change. Really serious things that we need to address, and they downgraded nuclear weapons. Quite right. But why was it then that there was no actual political discussion or economic decisions which downgraded spending on nuclear weapons and downgraded their salience in our security strategy? You know, it's like you decide they're no longer very relevant, but you keep up spending the amount you were spending on it during the Cold War, plus, you know, a completely crazy approach. So that's what's got to be changed. And we have time to change it. Not much, but there is a window of opportunity till 2015 with the election. There's no doubt it will be an election issue because of the vote on replacement in 2016. And we have to do everything we can to ensure that a change takes place in Labour Party policy. And the Labour Party leadership has got to understand that scrappage right is a vote winner. It's not a vote loser. I've been in debates in CLPs with there aren't that many of them actually, but pro-nuclear people, you know, in those CLP meetings, and they say, well, we can't be soft, we can't look soft on defence. We'll lose votes to the Tories. Look what happened in the 1980s and all that sort of thing. But in fact, the situation has changed, and the polls show, as I said, a majority against strike. So the Labour leadership has got to wake up to that. And I think that there are also positive signs. You know, the vote in Parliament 2 or 3 weeks ago on Syria, you know, that changed things in a very, very significant fashion. First of all, we're no longer the US poodle. We weren't any longer prepared to pay the blood price, as Tony Blair said, for the special relationship with the United States. Did the world fall apart and we sort of dropped off the edge? No. Barack Obama said, oh, okay, yeah, well then I'm going to do that too. I'm going to ask Congress to vote. And what's happened now? Diplomatic measures. Maybe Syria's going to be giving up its chemical weapons. You know, and that is a real step forward. So we need more of that. If we have that kind of courageous thinking where people actually are prepared to stand up for what they believe in, which should be no killing, war doesn't solve complex regional problems, weapons of mass destruction aren't going to resolve problems either. If we have people with the vision and integrity of Ron Todd, for example, then we could move forward. And that is what we need to have more of in the Labour Party and our movement, which is overwhelmingly opposed to nuclear weapons and war. We need to fight to bring about that change. Thank you.
I'm going to introduce Joe now from Left Unity. I was talking to him before the meeting started, asking him what his colleagues at school think about his political activity, and he said he does have to give up a few things. He has to give up his football to go to political meetings. I think it's really refreshing to have someone slightly younger than most of us in the room who's obviously going to be telling us about his own passions for a better world. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you. Right, I'm Joe Holland. I'm from Left Unity Northampton, and I'll be speaking to say how being young is, really. Right, so one of the old greybeards, really, told me about the young people who fought in the streets of Athens in 1967. When the generals there, they staged a coup. So a great British singer, songwriter, Ewan McCall, wrote about them We are the young ones, the readers, the writers, the copiers, the reciters. We are the young and the small. We are the writing on your wall. Friends, I am here tonight to tell you about my generation. We are the writing on your wall. Have you noticed how in every crisis and disaster, from the mall in Kenya to the streets of Syria, when the story is reported, how often is it said children and women were killed or badly injured? The young are described as often helpless. The young are always seen as victims on the receiving end of cruelty and brutal treatment. I am here tonight to tell you that the young are not helpless. They are not victims and not silent voices. They are not simply to be there, but to be used as pawns in adults' games. We have been silenced for long. We have been pushed around, and we have been treated as objects, as people in need of protection by those older than us, with more experience than us, with more strength than us. Not many young people stand up. We need more young people in these divisions. But young people will have their say. We will not be silenced, always waiting until we get older. We take inspiration from a young Pakistani girl, Malala, who dared to go on a bus to school. The bus got ambushed by Taliban thugs, adults who shot Malala, her friend and her friends, because she dared to want to go to school. She dared to want to go to school. The brutes thought they silenced her. They thought they had killed her. But they did not. And she provided us all with inspiration. Her demands were simple: an education to grow into the sort of person she wanted to be, free from the prejudice and the hatreds of older people who should have known better. To coin a phrase, we are all in this together. We all want good, safe housing, good, safe healthcare, decent education, and a safe future where we can grow up in peace and freedom. Ron Todd, in whose memory who we are here today, wanted such things for all of us, for Malala, for kids I go to school with every day, for everyone struggling to make this a better world. A few weeks ago, I spent a night outside All Saints Church with Bianca and a few other people. We were talking about and drawing attention to the evil bedroom tax. With others, we will campaign until that tax is over. Ed Miliband has said that he will end that tax, and he also said that he will extend the vote to 16 and 17 years old. This is a good idea because younger people can have their say. Even though it's a couple of years younger, it still makes a difference. Well, I welcome those pledges, but like young people all over the world, I will argue and struggle and fight until they happen. In the spirit of Malala, and indeed Ron Todd, I say to Mr. Miliband and anybody else who makes promises, look out, we are the writing on your wall.
Right, follow that. Thank you very much, Joe. That was really inspiring.
Fantastic to be here tonight, and so thank you very much for coming. And every time that happens, I wish that I had done the same. However, I'm going to be in a lucky position because the man that they're describing is a colleague, is a friend, but he was my granddad, so I have some inner knowledge that I can then pull out the hat at this time. We've spoken about the Labour Party quite a lot this evening, and it reminds me of a story that when Granddad was at a TUC rally, he was talking about the fact that all across the room there were people on their mobile phones, people who lacked substance, people who were actually more interested in what they looked like than the policies that they were talking about. It seems to me we're in a similar situation now, possibly. with people looking for sound bites in their policy manifestos, but actually not saying anything that's going to help working people at all. If Ed Miliband is quite clear on the bedroom tax, then let's hope that every single Labour councillor refuses from today to evict anybody. There is no need. If my granddad was here now, I think there's a couple of things that he would be. He would still be strong and active in CND, as his passion for peace would never be ending. But he would be a community member of Unite the Union, which is one of the most exciting things that we think has happened within the union movement. Unemployment is so high, we don't know what to do. However, people want a voice and they want to be active and they want to actually defend their communities. So the idea that anybody can become engaged with the trade union movement is fairly inspiring. You will notice, cleverly placed, fantastic guerrilla gardening kits. I suggest, as there may be a few left over, take more than one home, so I don't have to take them all to Northampton. The idea of this kit is quite simple. It's a little bit cliche, it's about growing a community. Unite the Union and Community Courtyard decided that we were fed up of actually waiting for people to come to our branch meeting. We're fed up of actually just putting a flyer through somebody's door. So what we did is we targeted an area in Northampton that is known for the top 5% of deprivation in the country, and we delivered 2,000 of those bags that you see on your chairs, and we delivered them with people from the community. And actually from that, people turned up to Unite training, they turned up to our branch, and they became more active. Why did they do it? Because in that bag, it asks for nothing. All it says is, come and tell us your story. For too long, we've been asking people for things, not prepared to give anything back. And what Community Courtyard and with Unite the Union were doing is saying, let's start again. We're not going to make any prejudgments about what you think about your locality. Come and tell us. And that actually goes back to the kind of man my granddad was. He was the kind of man who didn't judge people. That's why people wanted him to represent. That's why we wanted him involved. Because he actually looked at all the facts and believed in the truth. That's a hard thing to do in today's society. I think the other thing that's very exciting when we're talking about some of the work that Community Courtyard does is about the young people. It's fantastic to hear Joe speak so passionately about young people and so eloquently. However, I'm always disappointed that we miss our heroes here in Britain and that we look for heroes in other countries to actually show our inspiration. Why is that? Is that about the apathy that people see in Britain? Why are people not here tonight? We've got a good show out, but we could have had more. But I'm remembering of the thing that actually, if all you worry about is numbers, then that's all you get. So we're about comradeship, we're about the three principles of the trade union movement, which is about social justice, peace and equality. That's what we want to be building on. So when we think about those principles, we have to work out, how do we get young people back involved? How do we get more Joes? How do we get them from the streets into our trade union movement, into our youth clubs, into engaging in politics? And I think we've got to do something different. We've got to talk in a language that they understand. We've got to speak in a place where they are. And we've got to actually do it at a time when they can access us. All too long, we've had meetings in buildings that have been inaccessible for the majority of people. Maybe because of times, maybe because of finances. Even the community membership is too expensive for the majority of people who want to engage, which means the Community Courtyard actually looks at how we can sponsor people to become members. When you have the longest winter, which we only got out of, and we've only had a brief summer, and we're already back to the cold, people are already thinking about, shall I eat or be warm? People are already worried about how much money they can put on their electricity. For that reason, we need to be quite proactive within the union and thinking, how can we actually make sure that people are engaged? Because when you look after people, when they're in the tough times, they will stay with you. That's the principles of family. And that's what the trade union was all about. It was about a family. I see it on hashtag on Twitter all the time, Unite the Union, family, so I know it must be true. What is Community Courtyard? Because that's the reason partly we're here. Community Courtyard is a social enterprise that was set up in my granddad's memory. And why did we do that? We did that because, well, for two reasons. I was fed up of hearing about the heroes of the right. We're going to hear more about that next year when we have a Margaret Thatcher bank holiday, which will be the only day we all want to go to work. We need to be thinking, how do we get people to engage? In this trade union, along with some of the others, we have some fantastic people of the past who inspire and who educate. We need to use that. So Community Courtyard decided to use the memory of Ron Todd, base it on his principles, and get out in the community. We do that in a couple of ways. One of them is the guerrilla gardening. One of them is hoodies and goodies, because you've heard about the fact that children in poverty. That's 2.7 million children in the UK. Well, let me tell you what we did when we heard that children were in poverty in Africa. We had Live Aid, we raised money, and then we actually said, once we've got some money, we're going to actually help them be educated. People are dying now, and just because the right-wing media doesn't tell us about it, doesn't mean it's not happening. So, Community Courtyard wants to do more than just have a debate. Because we can talk about how sad it feels, but that's actually not going to help anybody, is it? So, on September the 27th, which is tomorrow, we have a Hoodies for Goodies Day, where people wear a hooded top and they donate £1, and that money goes back into education for young people so that every primary school child can access their after-school clubs and outside activities for free. Because we know, like we do with Live Aid and like we do with other countries, that education is the only way out of poverty, and we also know what this right-wing government wants is an uneducated population, because they're easier to manipulate. So we must do everything we can to make sure that young people have access to education right from the very beginning. In addition to that, the money that we raise goes into having a poverty kit, because we know that when people are on an employment benefit, what the benefit system has done now is meant that you can't bother 20 quid if you need to go and get a bus to see your family, and that you can't actually get extra money for gas and electric because they've actually stopped the emergency loans. And you do sometimes need that extra couple of quid to get through. You do actually need some help sometimes. And if we are going to be real about having those family values, who would you turn to when, to excuse the phrase, the shit hits the fan? You go back home, you speak to your mum and dad. And when those people can't help you, because we are actually all in it together, we're all skint, you need an organisation that can actually help you. And we want to be that organisation. This is the second Ron Todd Memorial Lecture, and it makes me very proud to be back here in Dagenham, because it's partly where he was, it's his home, it's his links, but it reminds me of how passionate he was about this area, what potential the organisation has to actually make a difference. Ron Todd didn't just work with people, he became friends with people, and that's actually what we're looking to do. We don't want to just work with people, we want to make relationships for life, but you can then change people. Joe, when he first met me, didn't say, you know what I want to do on Friday night, Bianca? I want to go and sit outside the town centre in a tent, because that would be really good fun. It's a journey that you take people on. Maybe you have to drive them with McDonald's sometimes, but generally, it's a journey you take people on, and at the end of it, you hope that they become as passionate as you. For the young people involved with Community Courtyard, that's the case. We also work with offenders and we support people in different prisons, because actually, if we're serious about organising, for the 85,000 people who are in prison, 80,000 of them are going to leave, and they're actually quite organised, and they want to be involved in jobs and employment and trade unions, they just don't know it yet. But statistics show that when people hang out with people who do not commit crime, crime drops. So wouldn't it be fantastic if prisoners, when they left prison, joined a trade union, became community members, and then Unite the Union was responsible for reducing crime all across the UK? Whereas some things that actually the right-wing press couldn't stop. Doing that would actually, then we would be an organisation that doesn't just cause strikes and cause chaos, then we're an organisation that actually makes the streets safer. How inspiring would that be? Peter started off his talk by saying, we're talking about the past and then we're talking about new and future ideas. Well, that's what Community Courtyard is. We don't think outside the box, we throw the box away because quite frankly, we've seen who's used it last time and we don't want anything to do with it. That's why Community Courtyard supports Left Unity, that's why we support the CND, and that's why we support Unite the Union. Because for us, they're the principles about working people, about peace, and about creating the kind of society that we all want to be a part of. A society where everybody is fair, everybody's treated equally, and we all have an opportunities to exceed in our own abilities. I hope that when you're here later, you'll chat and find out more about us. If not, and you want to go home because it's late at night, and I understand that, check us out on the net. It's www.communitycourtyard.org. And hopefully, this time next year, when we come back and have the next one, although it won't be in Dagenham, it will be in Corby, you might consider travelling down and meeting some other comrades and some other friends, and then we begin the movement. Because what we need to be is more than single-issue groups. If we're going to tackle this government, we have to be people who think collectively and do things for the right reason. It's been fantastic having you here this evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the speakers for coming tonight. And I look forward to hearing everybody's questions.
Said follow that, and you did. So well done. Really interesting, and I think I'd like to invite you to our next FNGP, which is a very stuffy name for the committee that runs our union made up of lay members. So I'd like you to come along and do a similar speech and tell us a bit more about what the organisation is doing. Actually, I think. So can I invite any questions or contributions from the floor, please? Okay, we'll start here.
I went through here tonight, so I'm talking too loud, please excuse me. I will stand up. Peter, very pleased to meet you. I've been a member of the engineering union since 1966. I'll keep it very brief. I'm on the retired members committee and I had a meeting at Woodbury on Monday. I'm well known in this area. I work for a big car manufacturer which recently has closed the tool room and the last of the stamping plant. I'll keep it very brief. A lot of what I've heard tonight is very refreshing and it's lovely to see a young person up on the top table. I don't have to be indoctrinated about trade unions. I've been a member, as I said, since '66 and I'm a retired person now and I'm still heavily involved in the trade union movement. I'm a member of the MPC, I'm a member of CERTA, I won't say too much more. I would guess there's probably about, I don't know, 40, 50 people here. It would be lovely if there was 500, but obviously that would be wonderful. But then are here for the right reason. The QC, you will apologise, I do like to make some notes because I can't always remember. Something that you said about collective bargaining, again, you don't have to indoctrinate me on that. Something you did say was very, very important to me. And I will be reporting some of this back to my branch meeting. I chair the Dagenham branch, by the way. I'm in the workplace branch at Dagenham. Vince Pashfield is my national officer. I'm sure you know Vince. You mentioned things like, bear with me 1 second, sorry. You mentioned things, child poverty is on the increase, it most certainly is. Mental illness is on the increase, it most certainly is. Drug taking is on the increase, it most certainly is. None of us need to know that, and there's lots of reasons for that. I mean, trade union membership, well, I could talk all night, but I don't need to. Why the hell aren't 3/4 of our workforce, then that are working members of trade union? I know it's been discouraged, it shouldn't be discouraged. I know Unite are doing lots of good things to try and get community membership, retired members, branches set up, etc., etc., etc. I think I've said enough, you know. Thanks all for your contribution. I listened carefully to what you all said and you all made a very valued contribution. I'm glad I came tonight.
Excellent, thank you very much for those comments and contributions. I don't think there's any particular questions, but correct me if I'm wrong, so it was mainly sort of, adding to what's been said. Any other sisters or brothers want to sort of make any comments or contributions or questions? Will?
Thank you. I just wanted to link two things from tonight's speakers, and that is the growth of the Labour Party and the decision on Trident. I'm a great believer that the way to encourage people to join the Labour Party is to demonstrate to them that it's worthwhile joining because they'll be listened to, and that they will have an influence over Labour Party policy. It's been, for me, one of the failings of the Labour Party for many, many, many years is the failure of the party to listen to its members. And I think the first test of that at this current time would be Trident, and that is that for the Labour Party to listen to its members about a scrappy Trident. And I think that, you know, following that decision from the Labour Party members will demonstrate what needs to be done, in my view, and that is to show people that it's worthwhile joining the Labour Party because you can have influence over Labour Party policy. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Will. I think Eve next.
Yes, please, for the camera. Yes, please, for the camera. Yeah, it's on.
Oh, it's on. Mine's about thank you, everyone. It was really inspiring hearing every one of you speak. In this borough, we're really enthusiastic about getting this community membership off the ground, and we really want to get a base that's not in a council building. I have approached the leader of the council at one point, but he's not come back to me since, so I will be chasing him. But we would like to get a base here in Dagenham or Barking where the local community can come, and you know, we want them to hear people like you and get involved in what they can, you know, collectively going forward together against issues that we all feel strongly about. So I would like to link in with you if possible and, you know, get some advice about how we can do this. I know Pilgrim Tucker as well is the community membership person for Unite, and funny enough she contacted me today, so I didn't realise that was going to be part of tonight's speaking. So I'm really glad about that, and we're really enthusiastic. We've got quite a few in our branch that want to really get it off the ground and get it going. Thank you, everyone.
I think the mic's being passed back. Can I just say, on the community membership, I was at a meeting last night in Waltham Forest, telling Paul about it. And one of the things that struck me there, it was at 1228, which is a working branch, but there's a number of community members there, but the enthusiasm at that meeting for people in work actually going out and spreading the word was just, it was immense. It was almost talked about as much as all the other things like public sector workers fighting back. I think that we're still finding our way a little bit, and it's all very, very new. And there's sceptics in our midst and cynics about whether it's going to work or not. But I think, people like us are very proud of being in the union that are giving it a chance and are starting to be a bit innovative and reaching out rather than just being in our silos. So, I think we do need to think about, we've got the community centre in Tower Hamlets now, which is up and running very successfully. I've met a number of activists in West London to try and explore the possibility of getting a similar, a shop front in kind of Hounslow or Southall. We're looking at that, so we should be looking at perhaps the Dagenham area as well as a potential future resource. Next speaker, please.
My name's Margaret Lane. I'm a village ward councillor. What I'd like to really ask is to Unite, is it Peter Kavangh? Yeah. I put this to the CWU before as a member of the Labour Party and also a member of Unite as well. I think it's very easy to whinge about the Labour Party, generally with people, I don't like this policy, I don't like this, I don't like that. What I said to the CWU, and I'd wonder what Unite's view on this is why do you not make a more direct approach with your MPs that actually support what your values are in a more kind of directed way? So rather than give, I think, 8 million Unite give to Labour, why don't you target it in a more kind of direct way? So your John Crudises, your John Cries, the people that actually support your values will actually come across for you, and then the working people that you want to represent will stand more of a chance. I don't really understand it.
If I understand your question right, I think you're saying, you're asking why a union like Unite, who gives a very considerable amount of our member subscriptions to the Labour Party, don't hold those Labour MPs, Labour councillors and others to account for what we do. And I think it's a question that's being debated the length and the breadth of the union at the moment. Our political strategy, which you're probably aware of, is saying precisely that, not just about holding people to account, but actually reclaiming the party that the trade union movement created. And of course, I'm sure everybody in the room is aware of what happened in Falkirk. It did precisely that, nothing more, nothing less. It was portrayed as some sort of sinister entryism. You know, when actually what we were doing was we were going out to our members, you know, in workplaces, factories, depots, bus garages, and saying, the Labour Party has been an immense disappointment, but let's reclaim it. Let's get some proper people who actually know what it's like in the workplace, know what it's like to struggle in the communities. Let's get those people elected so that we have got a voice back in Parliament, which was the same principle at the start of the last century. I think the General Secretary of Unite has made it clear that, you know, although we're not going down the road of disaffiliation or breaking the link, far from it, that MPs will no longer be able to sort of sit pretty and give us lip service and come to us election time, but ignore completely our policies and our values and our traditions and our priorities. You know, they'll be looking at a very different scenario in terms of funding, and not just funding. It's actually the support we give them when it comes to election times. And people in this room, you know, sitting near you, you know, in the room tonight, who go out every election time, do the hard work of knocking on doors and leafleting, every bit as valuable as those millions of pounds. And I think that you know, our union is having an ongoing debate about this. Unite, I don't think is anywhere near the position of, at the start of this meeting, as I did at the meeting last night, that some of the noises coming from Ed Miliband were welcome. They most certainly were. But he has to prove himself. He has to make those concrete. He has to make them a real prospect, and he has to give us far more detail. So I hope we're singing from the same hymn book, and I think, you know, the lay executive of Unite the Union is very much saying that, you know, we want to maintain that link. We want to be part of the Labour Party. We are the Labour Party. However, no blank cheques anymore.
Can I actually make a comment in relation to that in terms of Community Courtyard's position? Because we don't share that view completely. And the reason we don't share that is because we don't think that the Labour Party actually are making the right noises at all. We think that it's tokenistic and actually doesn't represent working people, which is why we're supporting Left Unity, which is why we're part of a new political party that's going to be starting in November. And I think that from November there'll be a really interesting time amongst the left, because for the first time in a long time there will be an alternative for working people. And what concerns me most for Labour and for Unite, you're right that Unite is not serving the links, Labour are, by actually not opposing the trade union laws, by not actually supporting trade unions, by not supporting working people, by evicting them from their houses. The things that actually Labour MPs and councillors are doing are an atrocity for working people, and it really is for me, and I would like to say that I speak for my family and the values of Ron Todd, a tragedy and a shame on them that every person who is affected, whilst not many people will be evicted from the bedroom tax, the actual fear of losing your home, the actual fear of all of that stuff happening is a disgrace. It is a disgrace that people are dying because of Atos. It is a disgrace that the legal system is actually going for months, just disappearing. It's a disgrace that the firefighters are having to retire at 65 or whatever. I mean, there are some really terrible things happening, and I don't see the Labour leadership standing on the streets, There are two types of politics at the moment. There's the academic politics, where people are talking in Labour conference and in ongoing conferences, and then there's the politics of the street. And if people are serious about reclaiming stuff, if they're serious about getting community membership working, they have to reconnect with people who are very passionate and are very annoyed and very disappointed in an organisation that's let them down so badly. That's all.
Unite Regional Secretary and Chair of the meeting clapped vigorously. Some people know me quite well in this room. But, the fact is that Unite the Union quite rightly has a rule book, has mechanisms for deciding its policies decided by the lay members. And as we sit here right now, we are affiliated to the Labour Party. I think it's absolutely the right thing to reclaim that party and make it start speaking for working people, as opposed to be some sort of grey mirror image of the Tory party. We'll talk about it outside.
I look forward to that.
I'm an objective chair. Any more contributions?
Thank you, Peter. John Dickey, 40 years a member of the Labour Party, 10 years a council leader, now extraordinarily disillusioned, and more disillusioned than ever by the remarks yesterday of Peter Mandelson. How on earth? I don't think that what Miliband said was particularly brilliant, but I think a freeze on gas and electricity prices is a small step in the right direction. And what happens within 24 hours? Peter Mandelson rubbishes it. Peter Mandelson gets on his feet. Lord Mandelson of Gold Digger gets on his feet and slags off the leadership. Now, I have to say, many of us on the left have been expelled for much less. We've been treated badly by the party for much less. The question I say, Peter, to you and all the other Labour Party comrades here is, what action will ever be taken against people like Mandelson? And how on earth can working people trust the Labour Party when people like him get away with what he did yesterday?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was a question to me. I don't know if I can answer it. I know what I'd like to say. I know what I'd like the Labour Party to do to Mandelson. I don't think he should be in the Labour Party. He's a disgrace to the Labour Party. He doesn't represent the working class. He never has done. And we should take no notice of him. But you're quite right. He should be treated in the same way as comrades on the left have been treated in the past. Someone at the back here. Would you like a microphone?
Thank you. I'm here wearing a number of hats today. As an officer of Unite, for one, as a friend of Bianca's, well, at least on Facebook anyway. But more importantly, an activist and a Labour movement activist, as well as a Labour Party member. I've got all these hats on. And I'm going to pose a question, because I don't think that the subjects from the three speakers were that disconnected from seeking a peaceful community and a peaceful world to the aspirations of young people and what young people are, really want to try and achieve. And how do we do that? Through a collective bargaining approach, through a democratic approach. So my question is to the table, if we try to pull the three strands that have been talked about tonight, what do you think is the best vehicle for doing that? How can we, as a movement, combine those points and really get together to be able to make a difference for our society in this country? Who'd like to go first on that one?
I'll start then, and leave people to have a little bit of thinking time. One of the things that I think we can do is about using music. I don't know about you guys, but I remember songs from 20 years ago. I can listen to the melody and I'm singing along the words to myself. If we want to change people's lives, we can do it through infiltrating their head with the words and the music. So if we're very solid about peace, for example, which I'm sure you'll all go home and check out, my granddad wrote a poem about the Toll Puddle Martyrs. We actually got our friend to put the guitar and music to it. It's now selling on every territory of the world through iTunes. People are learning about the Toll Puddle Martyrs without even knowing it because of the tune and because of the guitar person who's playing. Music has the potential to change the world. is whether or not we're brave enough to stop putting flyers through people's doors, which waste our time because we don't read them, and actually use a different medium. The social media, the internet, the music is the way forward, and it's whether or not any political group is brave enough to take that leap.
Well, I suppose one of the things that I'm very committed to is having a new culture of openness in politics. I think for too long, at every level, we've seen the kind of levels of secrecy, behind the scenes deals being done, whether it's the so-called special relationship with the United States or whatever it is, or we're always hearing these revelations in the media about, what dirty deeds have been done by politicians and their spin doctors. And we went into the war against Iraq on the basis of lies. All that sort of thing has just brought our political system, the sort of political apparatus and the party system into complete disrepute. And it reminded me of the situation at the Labour Party conference, where the conference floor was not allowed to discuss Trident. As I said, the resolutions were suppressed, and too much is done by people at the top, whether it's, whatever walk of life it is, too much is done to exclude ordinary people, us, basically, trade unionists or peace activists or whatever we are, or retired people, from making decisions about our own lives. And I think that that's what it comes down to for me. We have to have a new culture of openness and democratic discussion on a respectful basis. We all have to engage on a respectful basis and listen to what other people say. But unless we do that, unless we have the information, proper information to make decisions about our own lives, I don't see how we can ever change anything properly. I guess that currently, with the sort of new technology, maybe we have more access to information than we used to have, and that is a plus. And I think that's partly why people are getting more angry about things, because we know more about what goes on than we used to do. So that knowledge has got to be translated into us having the decision-making power, and it can't be any longer a situation where a small number of people keep that power for themselves. And that applies whether it's for the Conservatives or for the Tories or any other walk of life. We are the people, it's our country, it should be our economy, it should be our political sphere. We have to be able to make it how we want it to be.
Well, I think the answer is that the trade unions have got to seize power. And by that I don't mean that they ought to dole out Kalashnikovs and so forth. But what I mean is that they've got to exercise the power they've got. Trade unions have got 6.5 million members. That's more than 1 in 10 of every human being in the United Kingdom, from newborn babes to old age pensioners, including the unemployed. The political parties have got no standing of any equivalence at all. I don't know how many members the Labour Party's got now, but it's certainly got less than 200,000, and the Tory Party's got less than 100,000. We have 6.5 million members. We have to exert that power. What's happened over the last 30 years is that unions have been deprived of power. My own theory is that the anti-union laws have been fundamental in stripping power from the unions, not just in collective bargaining and in workplace negotiation, but in exerting power more generally in the political sphere. So we have to restore that. Just remember that it was the trade unions that exercised their power to create the Labour Party in the first place. And it was a battle over trade union law. It was the Taft Vale judgment in 1901 and the battle to restore the right to take industrial action that created the Labour Party and forced the Liberal government to introduce the Trade Disputes Act of 1900. 106. That was an exercise of trade union power. In my view, only trade unions have got the power to combine the various political messages that you've heard this evening and that everybody in this room knows perfectly well: renationalise the railways, kick the privateers out of the National Health Service, bring back progressive taxation, catch the tax evaders and so forth. These things are so bloody obvious, we don't need to discuss them. But the only people that are going to force those things to happen are the trade unions. Now, of course, I understand the debate that's going on in Unite and indeed in other unions about whether the Labour Party can be reclaimed or whether it can't be reclaimed, and a new political party has got to be formed. But that's a long process to do that and to make it a mass party capable of taking seats at elections and so on. But the unions can do something now, and now is the moment to do it. Because people, although we know that they're in an economic mess, that people are earning less wages than they were before. We've got 5 million people on 0 hours contracts, sat at home waiting for the phone to ring to know whether they've got any work today or not. We've got a quarter of children living in poverty and so on. Of course, people are very, very depressed, but they are also very, very angry. And the trade union movement has got to capture and harness that anger. I think Unite's initiative in creating community branches is absolutely brilliant. And Unite's doing very, very well in its leverage strategy. I don't know whether you know about the leverage strategy, but as a form of exerting industrial pressure, we got Frank back on his job at the Crosslink, one of my clients, I have to say. Deprived me of a brief, that case did. But he's got his job back, and that was the leverage strategy, and we've used it in other industrial disputes where we've been threatened with injunctions for taking industrial action, and the leverage strategy has found ways around it. Anyway, all I'm saying is that these initiatives, the new ways of thinking for trade unions, are absolutely crucial. The future of the working class in this country resides in what the current leadership of the trade union movement are prepared to do in order to defend them. I don't see the leadership of any of the political parties doing that.
I think we're getting close to the winding up time, but do you want to make another quick contribution?
Yeah, just a quick couple of things. I mean, some of the statistics, I don't know if I need the mic, some of the statistics that's been read out, I mean, it's very worrying. Again, is it on you? Community membership, yeah, absolutely, it's got to be pushed in a big way. I mean, I don't want to go over old history, but I mean, when the check-off system came in, as far as trade unions was concerned, that wasn't a good thing, as far as trade unions were concerned. We won't go over old ground. I mean, things that are worrying me big time. I'm a retired member. I mean, I look at that young lad there now. I get a pension. I'm very grateful for that. I paid in for it. The trade union did a hell of a lot to help me, and I'm grateful for that every single day of my life. Why the hell didn't people in this country come out in arms when the government of the day, and we won't talk whether we're conservative, liberal, whatever, putting the retiring age up for people, the government of the day want people to work till they're bloody dead. Can that be right? And then you said somebody came out with a figure, there's 5 million people in this country on 0 hours contract. Can that be right? Of course it can't be right, can it? But, you know, they need a lot more people to start, you know, waking up and smelling the gravy or whatever, you know, they really have. There's a lot of work to be done, you know, I mean, things are only going in one direction as far as I'm concerned, it's backwards at this time, and the backwards movement stopped.
Right, I'm the most mobile chair that I've seen for a long while here. Can I just a couple of things. I mean, I think John has articulated very well what I believe, that we can debate in meetings like this amongst a relatively small number. And we've got to stop talking to ourselves. We've got to reach out beyond meetings like this. And I think that the question was, how can we sort of bring together the strands that have been discussed tonight? It's how we can do that effectively. We're all, seasoned meeting attenders, and I always enjoyed them. Two nights running. I've got a night off tomorrow, but I actually think that that the real task is how we find a language. People talked about the relevant language and use new social media and all the rest of it to actually get out and give some of these facts and figures that we're all very good at exchanging in. By the way, my favourite one is the 1,000 richest people in the UK own £400 billion of money between them, which pays the entire UK structural deficit 2.5 times over. And Paul Travis has heard me say that about 15 million times. But we've got to start saying it beyond meetings like this, full of like-minded people, and actually get out there and not just talking to people, listening to people as well, not assuming what their problems and priorities are, but actually going out and asking. That's why I think community membership, community organisations, linking up with trade unions is the only way forward. We're probably, at the end of the meeting tonight, I think it has been an excellent meeting. I thank Bianca for inviting me to chair it, inviting such an excellent panel. I thank everybody for coming out tonight, and let's think about some of the things we've talked about and work out ways of spreading it outwards rather than just talking to ourselves. Thank you very much.